Charles W. Nash founded Nash Motors in 1916 in Kenosha, Wisconsin. We'll highlight the legacy of this company, including the creation of American motors, with the great-grandson of this automotive giant. James Wheary is my special guest next on I Remember. Oh, you're here. Hi, I'm Jim Peck. Welcome to I Remember. Joining me tonight is James Wheary. He's the great-grandson of Charles W. Nash, a history maker in the automobile industry. Take a look.
Charles W. Nash left the presidency of General Motors to become an independent manufacturer of automobiles. In 1916, he bought the Thomas B. Jeffrey Company in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and renamed it Nash Motors. A few years later, he bought a controlling interest in the Seaman Body Corporation in Milwaukee. He absorbed the company, and by the late 30s, it had become the world's largest auto body factory. He helped found Lafayette Motors, and in the early 20s moved operations from Indianapolis to Milwaukee. In 1925 and 26, he manufactured the Ajax in Racine after acquiring the Mitchell Motor Car Company. It then became the Nash 6. With his plants in Kenosha, Milwaukee, and Racine, Nash was a major employer in Wisconsin. In 1937, Nash bought the Kelvinator Appliance Company, and it became Nash Kelvinator. George Mason was named president of the company, and Nash became chairman of the board. Charles W. Nash died in 1948. 6 years later, Nash Kelvinator merged with Hudson to become American Motors. The story of Charles W. Nash, a poor farmhand who became a titan in the automobile industry, is a true rags-to-riches tale. And, as members of the Nash Car Club of America can attest, his legacy is still going full gear.
You know, I was talking to some college kids today, and I mentioned Nash Motors, and they looked at me completely blank. They had no idea what the Nash automobile was. When did it start?
Well, Charlie, first of all, he was born in 1864 in DeKalb County of Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
He was on a family farm, and
you're going to get ahead of me if you do that. I want to come back. I want to come back to that. So, just for a second, talk about the car company itself. When did he start it?
Well, he had bought the Thomas B. Jeffrey Company in Kenosha in June of 1916.
16.
And he built the first Nash car in 1917.
Now, why did he choose Kenosha?
Well, he had wound up in Flint, Michigan, or outside in Genesee County in western Michigan. And a couple of angels came along. And
but that you mean people who were going to give him money?
Well, Durant and Dort.
Great names. I want to come to them.
Powerful people.
Oh, yes.
Will Durant being the founder of General Motors.
Mm-hmm.
They took this young guy under their wing, and that's where his career began, in road carts, carriages, then into automobiles.
So he saw the possibility of the automobile.
Right. He had goals in life.
Tell me about that. He had, either 3 or 4 distinct goals?
Right.
What were they?
Really an amazing, unbelievable story. He wanted to learn how to be a laborer, interestingly enough. And he had been abandoned at age 6. Mm-hmm. But he was very willing. He had a great attitude, and he had the determination to make something out of himself. So it wasn't against him to roll up his sleeves, get his hands dirty, and dig in, so to speak. So he became known as a child of determination and grit, and that was in Genesee County in Michigan.
So he wanted to be a laborer.
Right.
What were the other 3 goals?
Well, secondly, he hoped to, and through reading a lot of books and so forth, to move up the ladder to become a manager, supervisor, superintendent of a company or of a business or a company.
And he formed these when he was really pretty much a little kid.
Again, just an incredible story.
Okay, goal 3.
Goal 3, own his own enterprise.
Wow. And goal 4?
Goal 4 was to make it as good and as great as it could possibly be, and to be what he did become, one of the 4 titans in the automobile industry.
What? First of all, before I do that, I should ask you, was the Nash a good car?
Well, because he came from very modest, if not very, very poor means, his goal was to build a car, Jim, that was affordable, dependable, practical, high-performing, all these things, for a price that the middle class and people that didn't have that much to spend.
Now, this was before Henry Ford had the assembly line and was turning out
Well, that's a story, too. Henry became one of his most closest friends.
But what cars were his competition when he started Nash?
Well, just to finish the other point for just a second, he was determined to sell a car that people could afford. And really, he made the comment that these cars were worth a lot more than what I sold them for. But he wanted people that were in his category of life at one time to be able to have a car. So yes, they were high quality. And he did a lot of experimental work.
In what areas?
Well, in building various dream cars, so to speak, in the Nash name. I guess you would say experimental type vehicles and so forth, all through the years, in the teens, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s. Actually, he wasn't still active in the business after the whole Nash Calvinator thing was completed, and then the American Motors thing came into play.
You mentioned something, and I just expand on that a little bit, because I remember Nash Calvinator,
Right.
but I don't remember why I remember it. What was it?
Calvinator Corporation was the largest refrigeration company in the country back in those days, and I'm talking about in the 30s. There weren't many others, but Philco had affiliated with Ford, and Frigidaire had affiliated. Frigidaire had affiliated with GM, and Philco had affiliated with Ford. So Charlie invented a heating cooling system at Nash called Weather Eye, and perhaps later we can talk a little bit more about it. But it was very important that you had an understanding and a knowledge of refrigeration and of heating and cooling and so forth. And that's why these auto companies started folding in these refrigeration businesses. So that was the enamor of connecting or becoming, through a merger with a refrigeration business, the reason to move forward and to see the company go on.
Now, you've teased us a little bit, and I cut you off at one point. But let's go back and talk about who Charlie Nash was, because that has got to be one of the great rags to riches stories in America.
Well, his parents bound he, his older sister, younger brother, and there was another younger sister that we don't know much about, but if anything, really. But they were given away to the state of Michigan.
Why?
Well, because the family was so poor, the mother and father were not getting along, and they filed for a divorce when he was 6 years old. Now, I mentioned in my very early comments to you that he was born in northwestern Illinois, DeKalb County, worked on a family farm there that was owned by a brother or a cousin of his father. That farm started to go down. So his family moved over to western Michigan. And when they got there, his parents were not getting along well at all. They filed for a divorce. And that was practically unheard of.
Boy, yeah,
in
we're
those
talking
days.
in the 1800s.
Well, we're talking about, in 1868 or so.
Wow.
And in 1870, they made an arrangement with the state of Michigan to take these 3 children. And the state bound them out to farms. And Charlie actually lived on a total of 3 different farms over a 20-year period in those days. And he had tremendous accomplishments, which I can tell you about on each one of them.
But at 6 years old, to suddenly have your parents say, "Okay, you're going to go away now," and
Right.
Did he ever see his parents again? Do we know?
Not really.
Wow.
But very late on, there was once before they passed away. And by that time, he had become extremely successful.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a cemetery in Flint that basically they funded and set up and so forth. And the parents, and I think one of the brother, and there's other family members that are buried over there. So other than that, no. But on that first farm, his goal was to learn the farming trade. Now, he had goals. I mean, today, 3 big buzzwords, as we all know, are choices, goals, and creating and developing skill sets. And whether he realized what he was doing or not, they probably weren't based on those words that we hear a lot today, and we've heard for generations now. But that's what he was doing.
And he was he making any money?
50 cents a month.
A month.
Now, the state of Michigan worked it out with these farms to take him. And on that first farm, 50 cents a month, free room and board. He was promised at age 21 by the state that he'd get $100 while he was on the farm, in addition to his 50 cents that he was being paid.
Munificent sum.
And he was promised a suit of clothes, and while on the farm, up to 3 months of formal education, which we don't think he got much of. He was really a self-educated man.
So he went to school here and there.
He became an avid reader.
Wow.
He loved reading about mechanics and about technology, even just business in general, math, English, whatever.
He didn't stay on that first farm too long, did he?
Well, 6 years.
So that's a pretty long time.
And
Although now
this was the
we got him up.
Lapworth family who were the farmers.
So, I'm sorry,
The
what?
fellow in Lapworth.
Okay.
They were a very religious family. And Charlie didn't have a problem with that. He went to church with them often, most of the time, but they'd go 3-4 times a week, and they'd go as many as 3 times on Sunday. So on one Sunday, when he was now 12 years old, he knew the family was going to church. He went and hid out in the barn. And they didn't know where he was. And when they couldn't find him, they went ahead and left. And when they left, he walked 15 miles down the dirt roads, knocking on farmers' doors, finally found one that took him in. Wow. So that's the second farm.
That's the second farm.
And he meets a farmhand who is the equivalent of what we call a master carpenter nowadays. Mm-hmm. And this fellow was not only, doing repair work on buildings, but building actual structures. But his specialty was building furniture. And Charlie was enamored by that. And he had such determination, big word, that he wanted to learn how to do this himself. So he became a master, well, maybe not a master, but he started building furniture himself.
So while he's working on the farm, he's also learning all this other stuff.
Now, on that farm, he's being paid $8 a month.
Oh,
big raise.
Yeah.
So the next thing that happens...
We're talking now, we got him in about the 1880s, roughly.
Well, this is at 12 that he begins, and
so
he's there until he's about 18.
Okay.
But over that period, not only did he do that and accomplish that, but he met he had saved up, believe it or not, very frugal, always frugal his whole life, $25.
Wow. Out of that little bit of money.
On the little monies that he was making. He bought 10 sheep.
10 sheep?
Yes.
Okay, what did he do with 10 sheep?
He took care of those sheep. He made for arrangements on a farm to have a pasture and so forth for them. And when those sheep would grow their full coat of wool, he'd walk them up and down the roads in Genesee County. and knock on farmers' doors and say, you know, I'll make you a deal. If you'll take my sheep and you shear the wool and you get to have that, in return, I want 2 for 1.
Ooh.
Geometric progression, exponential growth.
He was a
1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8.
He was a shrewd businessman already.
Already. His aptitude.
And frugal. You mentioned that he was frugal all of his life.
Yeah.
The story I read was that some people have the first nickel they ever earned. They said about Charlie that he had
Well,
all the
I don't want to
nickels.
get ahead of myself, but Wally Chrysler is the one who said that.
But just as long as you brought up that name, how did a cigar lead to the founding eventually of Chrysler Motors?
Well, if you want to jump to that, I'll tell you the story.
For a second, let's do that.
Charlie had risen to the general manager and president of Durant Dort Carriage Company. And that was Josiah Dallas Dort and William Crapo Durant's business before automobiles. The financiers from Lee Higginson, the investment bank in Boston, who funded the early people in wagons and carriages and cars, they were well aware of what was going on with a lot of these people who wanted to build a car. And there were hundreds of them, believe it or not. Most of them failed.
Yep.
But the one that Jim Starro, the investment banker, had a line on was David Dunbar Buick. And Buick reached a point where he was hanging on the cliff, ready to go off. So he pursued that. And that was the first GM company that Will Durant bought with the funding from Starro Lee Higginson. So Charlie rises up, and this is in 1904. So a little time had gone by.
A little bit of time, yeah.
Yeah, so Charlie is sent over there by Durant to run the whole factory operation
Of Buick Motors.
of the Buick Motor Car Company, an independent, one business. And he grew that company from practically bankruptcy to a multi-million-dollar business. And where did he learn all these things? But he did. So in roughly 11 or a little later, in that year, he said to Will Durant, Billy, he said, I can't handle all this myself. I need somebody to assist me come in here and run the factories. And Starro says to Durant, I've got your man. He's in Pittsburgh. He's running the factories for American Locomotive, ALCO, American Locomotive Company. And so they arrange for Charlie to go to Pittsburgh. Charlie goes down there. He spends the day with this fellow. And they go out to dinner that evening. And after dinner...
Charlie wasn't particularly impressed with him.
Well, no. But after dinner, the guy reaches in his breast pocket, and he gets out 2 cigars. And he offers one to Charlie. Charlie was a cigar smoker, and he sees the band on the cigar. It's a Panatella.
Ooh.
That's the brand of cigar that Charlie smoked.
Good cigar.
Oh, he snatched that. And they light up. So the two of them are now sitting there like you and I are here, and they're smoking and chatting and whatever. Well, he's thinking a little more of this guy. So all that comes to an end, and he goes back to Flint, sits down at the table with Durant and Starro, and they say, well, what'd you think of him? He said, well, at first, really wasn't impressed. Most of the day, I wasn't. I mean, he was okay, but I don't know if he's our man. However, then he told the story I just told you about the offering of the cigar and so forth. He said, you know, that's my favorite cigar, and I don't have to tell you guys. I thought he was okay. And they said, well, what's he being paid? And they said, or Charlie said, $12,000 a year. And of course, back then, that was presumably a lot of money.
It was a lot of money, yeah.
And they said, well, let's put the pencil to this thing and let's see what we can do. So they worked on it, and they said, you know, I don't think we can do better than half that, $6,000. So if you're not too uncomfortable with that, we want you to go back to him
Wow.
and see what happens. He goes back to I apparently just called him on the phone or whatever he did. He didn't go back to Pittsburgh, to my knowledge, and told him that. And this guy snatched it like an alligator, and because that was how hungry he was to get into the early automobile business. So he comes to Flint, and it's Walter Chrysler.
Walter Chrysler.
So Charlie Nash gave Walter Chrysler his first job
and
in
it
the
wouldn't have
automobile
happened
business.
without that cigar.
So here's a guy
He
who
must have been a heck of a salesman himself to get a guy at $12,000 to come in
Absolutely.
for $6,000 and
yet
move across country.
And yet you've maybe read some stories and been on the internet or whatever and read that Charlie was somewhat quiet, not that sociable and so forth. No. I mean, he wasn't A-type, but he was sociable.
Well, anybody that could
He
sell
was a great people's person.
who could sell sheep the way he did and then sell Wally Chrysler on
Well, that
on this
flock
thing.
of sheep, by the way, became between 80 and 90.
Wow. You knew your great-grandfather. You were a little boy. What was Charles Nash like as a
Well,
grandfather?
I was born in 1940, and Charlie passed away in 1948. Now, I can't say that when my mother carried me up to Rest Lake and Manitowish Waters that I knew him, but I can say I spent my first time up there at Nash Camp, and he amassed over time 120 acres on Rest Lake, including an island, which for the last 60 years has been a YMCA affiliated camp, and it's wonderful. He'd love it. But anyhow, so by the time I got to be, 3 or 4 or whatever, I have vivid recollections of him. Because the second thing, Jim, that happened on that second farm was that he met a guy named T.J. Adam. And T.J. Adam had what was called a hay pressing machine. It was broken down, it didn't run. And Charlie said to him, I can help you with this. I can get this thing going for you. They started a business. This is after the sheep. That's where Charlie got some more money. He sold the sheep.
Wow.
So they start, Charlie works on this machine. It's horse-drawn. Now, it's not a thrashing machine. They go out in the fields and chop down, the hay. And then this machine would pick it up, and it'd bring it in, it would press it, and then bale it into bales that weighed between 250 and 300 pounds. They wound up employing up to 6 or 8 guys because no 1 or 2 or 3 people could run this.
Messing with machinery like that can get you hurt.
Well, absolutely. And not only that, the enamorment that we had is here was Grandpa Nash without this.
Oh, really?
From here out.
He lost part of his little finger.
His right pinky. One day he got distracted and he looks off and he's pressing hay and he loses this just under the knuckle.
And he would let you talk about that?
So we're up at Nash Camp as little kids, and this is my older brother and I, and Charles Nash Miller, who was my mother's cousin, another one of the Nash daughter's son. These two were very close. They were the first 2 grandchildren of the Nashes. Anyway, we'd be up there with them, and we became enamored with that, and so it was his son who was the 3rd great-grandchild that knew him. The rest of them, I have a younger brother by 5 years who was born in 1945, but he was only 3 years old when Charlie died, so he doesn't really remember him. But one of the great things about Charlie, he loved to cook. He had a full chef's regalia.
Really?
He'd put it on, and he'd have family mainly, or for birthday parties or anniversary celebrations or whatever, he'd always barbecue at a great big stone or brick fireplace out on the grounds at the main facility. He had another one out on that island. Often we'd all go out there for, wedding anniversaries and certain celebrations. But he loved to just barbecue everything and anything. I mean, from as little as hot dog hamburgers to corn, big sides of beef for bigger gatherings and so on. And he loved kids. And he loved kids so much because he was a kid, but he was a kid that wasn't treated normally.
He was never able to be a kid. He had to work.
Well, that's it. I mean, he was one by definition,
Right.
but he never got to enjoy growing up from
But
being a little
he
kid.
liked to see you guys play.
Oh, and he'd play with us. We'd play softball, we'd play badminton, we'd play croquet. They even had a tennis court there. We'd hit the tennis ball. And we'd be out on the lake, and he'd pull us in rafts. He had a custom Chris craft that was all mahogany wood, one of the original ones, beautiful. And there he had a 3-stall boathouse. And we had just so much fun. So, but we were enamored by that hand. And we spent a lot of time saying, Grandpa Nash, let's see your hand. And I mean, whether he told us 15 times what happened, it didn't make any difference. We still, just drilled him about it.
James Wheary, this has been fascinating. We just touched touch the tip of the finger on all of this. And here's a man who started out as a throwaway kid and ended up the head of General Motors and then started his own company. What a great pleasure, and thank you very much for being here.
Well, you're most welcome.
And thank you for being with us. Always nice to see you. Hope you join us next time as we continue to remember. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.